So good afternoon. Welcome to our now virtual conference that we've called Finance Game Changers for 2020. What we'll be doing is exploring how technology can really support your business. So it's great to see so many people online. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days today. As you may know, we've had to reschedule this to a virtual event, and whilst it may not be the Ritz, rest assured we have some excellent speakers and content for you today. So my name is Angus Millage. I work as a sales director for SAP Concur. I also used to work as a finance director for a multinational company. So today we'll be talking about what 2020 looks like for finance, from the big trends to some new technology that can really support you and your business. So a few things from a housekeeping perspective. The webcast will play through your speakers, so there's no dial-in. So hopefully it makes it a bit easier. There's some additional materials on today's topics that can be found in the Resources tab. And if you have any tech issues, please press refresh and then try the help widget, or just send us a chat. We do have a technical team available to support. There is also an on-demand recording, which will be emailed to you in the next 24 hours to listen to or share at your leisure. And for the best experience, please use a high bandwidth internet connection, close any other programs that you might have open, and log off of your VPN. So we'll start off by hearing from our panel of experts about what their big game-changing trends have been with regards to tech and their thoughts into the coming year. This will be followed by our guest speaker, Gerald Ashley, who will speak about risk, strategy, and decision-making. We'll then have a short break before regathering to explore what efficient spend management looks like from SAP Concur. And if any point, like mentioned before, if you have any issues with your virtual conference environment, please just message us on chat and our technical team will be there to support. But first, what are the top trends and game changers for 2020? So at this point, I would like to introduce our panel, starting off with Lisa Dowling. Lisa Dowling is the Senior VAT Manager at TaxBack International. And you've probably heard of TaxBack before, but if you haven't, what they do is they combine technology and industry expertise with value-added partnerships to deliver comprehensive VAT solutions. We also have Justina Rashimaiti, who is the Finance Transformation Specialist at ION. I'm sure ION needs no introduction. But if you haven't heard of ION, they deliver mission-critical trading and workflow automation software. They also happen to be a customer of SAP Concur. And then finally, we have John Lapham, who is a senior solutions consultant at SAP Concur. And what John does is he speaks to finance professionals every day, talking to them about how he can make, or how we can make, their spend management processes a lot more efficient. So before we head onto the panel conversation, I'd like to share with you some technology that Forbes noticed as being the top corporate apps in 2019. And I'm sure you'll recognize many of these logos in front of you, if not all of them. And what I found really interesting about these apps is that they generally can be categorized into two main groups. You have the infrastructure apps on your left and the productivity apps on your right. What's also really interesting about this is that these apps are all cloud-based, which really shows about how the industry is moving into the future. So with such an array of tech available to us today to help improve productivity it just becomes, and help automate some of these manual tasks, it really becomes quite difficult to choose the right app for your business. So without further ado, let's see what our panel think. If you have any questions for the panel, please post them into the chat and we'll look to answer them at the end of the session. Right, so the first topic I'd like to discuss is trends and observations over the last 12 months. Now, Justina, as your role as Finance Transformation Specialist at ION, can you shed some light on what ION have done over the last 12 months and what your business considers as big game changers? Oh, have we lost Justina? Are you there? I think we've lost Justina for a minute. John, could you potentially tell us what your clients tell you are the big game changers in their business over the last 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a lot of finance leaders that I'm speaking to, the big game changer for them is they want to be making more data-driven decisions. So having more data to report on is #1 priority for so many people I'm speaking to day in, day out.
Okay, and I guess, data is one thing, but the need for real-time data becomes ever so more critical in this day and age because it's really fast-paced. What do your clients tell you about having access to real-time data and the decisions that they can make as a result of?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, lots of people that I speak to are still sort of using paper-based processes, particularly around expense and invoice, meaning that they don't get visibility of spend for 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes after it happens. But being able to have that real-time data in front of them allows them to make quick decisions and actually gain greater control of spend. I'm going to touch upon a particular case study of a business I'm working on a little bit later on, which just highlights that even more.
Okay, thanks, John. Justina, do we have you back in the room?
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry, have some technical difficulties here. Apologies if I'm going to repeat someone because I'm trying a bit hard to hear everyone. I suppose thinking about those big kind of game changers for the business is the focus going on the system controls and removing the human error. I think it's we face those challenges daily, and our focus is really going towards that now.
Okay. Now, finance transformation, this is definitely your bag, and it's a bit of a hot topic and a buzzword that is thrown around quite loosely. Can you shed some light on what it actually means and how you see it evolving into 2020?
Yeah, I suppose it's an exercise to improve finance efficiency and reduce costs while we have to provide higher quality, a higher value service to the business. In short, we just need to deliver more every day with less. I strongly believe finance transformation is part of most of the businesses today. But I think the next steps is to apply those principles in a lean manner. We tend to just get it done, which is plan, do, plan, do, plan, do. Due to the pressure to get it done, there's often temptation to start the execution as soon as possible and deliver as fast as possible without considering the actual business growth. This ultimately results in a much slower output and lower quality. A golden rule we have in ION actually is never automate a bad process. If it doesn't fit in a system standard, your process is overcomplicated. We end up spending thousands of professional service hours and specifically customize the system to be able to execute those overcomplicated processes. Then system immediately becomes just super heavy, requires heavy support and adoption rate drops. And it gets to a point when there's just simply not utilized. Like with the transformation, we should deliver efficiency, not create additional headcount.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because a lot of the businesses we speak to tell us that their companies want to grow, whether organically or by introducing new products into the market. But what we always hear is that no additional investment is made into the finance team, and that finance teams are expected to do more with less, which lends to what you've just said. Now, what I find really interesting in terms of this topic of finance transformation, in your experience, is this largely done proactively by businesses, or do you think that legislation quite often forces companies to transform their finance function? I think, Justina, if you could maybe talk about your experiences at ION, and then, yeah.
Yeah, no, perfect. Yeah, I think both. Like coming from the company where automation is our bread and butter, we're a fintech company. We constantly review and apply lean standards and system controls to keep up and improve the current efficiency levels and output quality, which sometimes are forced by legislation, and sometimes we are told to be creative and find ways to achieve it without additional headcount. I think I have a good example. Yeah. I think it was last year we implemented SAP Concur Receipt Audit, which in a nutshell, a robotic kind of element that checks the receipts and verifies the vendor name and the amount and the date and so on and so on. And it gets to a point where we have the line items and the receipts verified, and then it goes to business for approval. So it allowed us to actually retransform our expense team into kind of like spend optimization team. They actually start looking for ways to achieve corporate rates and get new agreements in place with different hotels and airlines, rather than waste their time reviewing receipts, which, like, when we think about it, in a matter of fact, it's actually too late. The money's spent. We can't get it back. It's too late. It's done. So it was no brainer that we just needed some sort of automation to replace that process.
Thank you, Justina. On the topic of legislation, Lisa, you speak to many companies, helping them to improve their international VAT recovery. And I would imagine things like making tax digital may have had an impact. Can you talk to us about how you see legislation changing companies and asking companies to invest more in technology?
Yeah, so I think legislation changes definitely puts a sense of urgency and priority around certain projects, for sure, for companies to focus on. In the last kind of 12 months or so, in the VAT world, the introduction of real-time reporting, e-invoicing, standard audit file for tax, digital reporting of VAT data has all impacted on our business and our clients' businesses. So we've had to adapt process, capture more transactional data, and automate further to meet the real-time reporting requirements of the different tax offices. So, and the VAT landscape is ever changing. So we have to kind of try to keep up with this, and that is done through automation or technology. Our integration with SAP Concur has helped with this, because we can extract kind of rich source of initial data for company expenses, and then to be able to report that to the tax office in a more automated way is definitely the focus of all businesses.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. John, you speak to a lot of companies, as we've said. SAP Concur aside, what are they telling you about the type of projects they're embarking on, and what kind of technology are they investing in at this point in time?
Yeah, I think there's a big push and a demand from employees to be able to do things, from home, which is really relevant right now with things that are going on, but also from mobile as well. And I think if we look at those applications that were the most popular last year, you can see so many of those are mobile applications, and that's a big driver. Lots of finance leaders are telling me that there's a demand from their employees that they need to be able to do things on the go.
Yep. And, you know, under the current climate with COVID-19, I would imagine that things like duty of care would be really important for employees and employers alike to make sure that their colleagues are not traveling into areas at risk, and it could be other things like natural disasters. Are we seeing a move for companies to taking this issue more seriously? John, your experience?
Yeah, 100%. Concur isn't just an expense tool. We sort of help businesses manage travel, expense, and invoice in an integrated platform. And one of the things that's quite unique to us is when you combine travel and expense together, you can use a product called Locate. You can understand where people are, and you can make them aware of problems or issues that surround them. We were only in Seattle earlier this year, and there was a shooting in the area, and Concur were able to locate us immediately and make sure we were okay. Now, that's quite an extreme example, but it's really important, and people are wanting to take more and more care of their employees and ensure they can reach out and offer them help if they ever find themselves in a difficult situation.
Thank you for sharing, John. Justina, you mentioned earlier about how companies, they reach a point where they have to make a critical decision regarding either investing in new technology or investing in additional headcount resource. In your opinion, at what point does this happen where a company makes this decision, and what are the drivers behind that decision?
Yeah, I suppose everyone has their own journey. Like Ion grew overnight. We didn't have the luxury of time to prepare. The direction to choose the systems that could support our growth, legislation changes, and so on is super important. We implemented Concur as a minimum valuable product. That was the decision made by us instead of trying to overcomplicate the system, which now we can rely on the system, which is fully established, tested, and is based on the best practice on the market, which is easy to maintain. With this approach, we don't need a system admin. We don't actually have anybody to support our Concur system. And we have travelers in 50 plus countries around the globe. And we have over 6,000 employees. So like it's a long-term investment, and you really want to make sure that the return on investment is greater than the cost. And not always the manual process is a bad process. I always tend to think if you take a manual process, if you multiply by 10, say by volume or by complexity, is it sustainable? And whether does the process add any value to the business? So if we take again, like, recording a vendor invoice or processing an expense report, like it's no brainer that there's no value added to the business. It's after the fact, it's too late, the money spent. So then it becomes very easy to make that decision whether the system is required to automate those processes.
Thank you. So now moving on to technology in 2020, I'd really like to talk about what the panel thinks about the trend in technology for finance teams going into the future. So have you seen any technology efficiency improvements, John, with your business and clients? What are they talking about in terms of, we've spoken about what projects they have implemented, but is there a common theme coming out that a lot of your businesses are talking about in terms of projects going forward?
Yeah, sure. A big buzzword at the moment, and something that I get asked a lot, is about the use of AI, and particularly about the introduction of AI into Concur and how it can improve our product. There's also some concerns around AI as well. Naturally, some people are concerned about jobs and can we automate too much? The other thing I get asked about a lot is integrations. You know, people are buying more and more software. There's more and more applications, and they want to know how they can make those applications talk together. And again, automate that process from end to end as well. So I'd say they're the two sort of hot topics I hear about.
Thank you. Lisa, Justina, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with John on the AI and machine learning as well. We've definitely invested a lot in it in the last year or so to kind of replace some of the more manual, repetitive processes. So again, I would agree with John that there is some concern around that with employees. But the way we see it is our employees are our experts. And so we want to use AI and machine learning and other technologies to kind of free up the human time to work on more the items that need consideration or interpretation or an expert on the case. And so AI and ML will be used then to replace the more manual, repetitive processes.
Thank you, Lisa. Justina, do you have any thoughts on AI?
Yeah, I completely agree with John and Lisa. I think we don't want to spend time anymore to do repetitive tasks. And actually go back on an example for receipt audit, when we implemented it last year, we have the expense team now focusing on the real-time dashboards, and they just review the exceptions and policy violations, and it's in real time. Like once the trip is about to get booked, they receive little notifications where they can actually make a difference, rather than kind of focusing on that repetitive processes or focusing on static reports. I think those kind of the analytical BI reports, I think, is like really like where we kind of going towards. Like we don't even want to see a report that is kind of issued at the end of the day, which with the dashboards now we're actually able to just refresh and have a real-time data on demand.
Thank you. So all three raised a very important and controversial topic in AI and machine learning, and how it could be considered as a threat. What would you say to somebody who saw this kind of technology as a threat? What would your advice to them be? Lisa, should we start with you? Oh, John.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first questions I will always ask a finance leader is, if I could give you 20 or 30 hours a month back to your business or your team, what would you do with it? And I don't think anybody's ever turned around to me and said nothing, or would struggle to fill that time. So I think it's a great opportunity to free up time to work on those projects that always get pushed to the bottom of the pile. So that's my advice.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think companies need to consider that, that they have to kind of adopt technology, otherwise they will get left behind. So, we have to move with the times, and we have to kind of just educate the guys that we work with to the benefits of technology and how it can be used to make our processes more efficient and accurate, and free up their time to work on more value-add projects.
Justina, your advice to companies concerned about AI?
I completely agree with John and Lisa. Like, I think we do need to move on with the times, and I think we all can think of better ways to spend that late evening that we're working on something that is super frustrating and we can't see kind of the wood for the trees. Like the robotics, I think it's a new word that keep flashing up now. Like artificial intelligence is kind of like it's something that we're all comfortable with, and I think most of the companies have invested and they've seen the benefits of it. But we just need to move on with the times and actually use our time in a way that we actually add value to the business. That's a question that I always ask before I take on to do any task. If it's taken more than an hour or two, I always ask, like, am I actually achieving anything? What's my goal? So we always kind of need to think, rather than just get it done, we should always think like what we are trying to achieve. And I think it becomes very clear then in times where like simple like human input is just not enough, and you need that kind of like large data and artificial intelligence and data models to kind of to support you to grow and to keep up with the times.
Thank you. Next topic I would like to discuss is technology adoption, because as we all know, introducing some new technology into a company is only as successful as the team using it and effectively making use of the investment that the company's made. So what has been, and more specifically, I would say Justyna again, what has been your experience with bringing new technology on board from a change management perspective?
Yeah, like coming from the fintech company, technology is our bread and butter, so the adoption rate is quite positive. But we do see, especially like in the last maybe couple of years, the transformation team objective has changed a little. The finance has changed completely, but even our objective trying to like automate and bring more efficiencies and quality, we're actually expected to act as a change management group as well. So while we saying like we have to make sure always have to not forget that once we have the tool to use and it's a great system and it's it would achieve so much, but we always need to remember that we need to bring the people up to speed. So the way we customize the system, we need to make sure to remember to customize the teams. So I think the change in systems and processes drives the change in teams, and we tend to forget that sometimes, and we tend to expect that there's a great tool, you can use it and it's going to achieve X, Y, and Z, but we forget to actually give them a little help to actually like to carry out that change management piece, which is I think is super important. In a lot of the times when you try to introduce a new module, even with SAP Concur, we've overcome that a few times. We still need people to adopt to it and to be able to use it. So we always say that like the post go live hypercare support, I call it's one of the most critical tasks, and we tend to forget because it's done. Like the support after everybody forgets about, because like the system is implemented and we should achieve all the goals that we have set for. But I think it's very important, and we should definitely monitor and support and do like a retrospective analysis and just kind of check back in a month, in 3 months, in 6 months to make sure that the adoption is steady.
And in your opinion, would you invite users of the technology to be part of the decision-making process? Would they be part of the project team? How involved would you have the team members using the technology? How involved would you have them in the process, in the buying process?
I would say heavily involved. We tend to involve our all business teams, like they're the ones that are suffering with the pain points. So we can't solve the issues until we know the issue. So the business teams that are suffering with a day in and out, they're the ones to let us know what needs to be fixed. And I think from involving people from very start, it just allows us to, the adoption rate, it's way more positive than if you simply don't involve them and just give them something what you think is best. So I would say like definitely involve your teams. And then I don't know about other companies, we don't have the luxury of having teams focusing on projects only. So we've no other way but involve the business teams to achieve our goals.
Thank you. So, John, I'd like to ask you a question. Justyna mentioned that obviously ION is a technology company. We see that technology companies are very quick adopters in new technology. But you sell to a wide variety of different industries. What would you say that the change management process is vastly different from industry to industry? or do you see a common theme coming out through that process of implementing a new piece of technology?
Yeah, I think it does vary company to company. And my advice as companies start this journey is to have a well-structured change management plan, first of all, to be very clear around communication, but also to involve people in the evaluation and to have product evangelists. Because what you don't want to do as a finance team is be solely responsible for the success of the rollout. If you can have product evangelists in different departments who can field questions for you and promote the tool across the business, that can be really, really helpful. And that's one of the best ways of doing a successful rollout, in my experience.
Would you say that the generation makeup of a particular organization has an impact on the change management process?
Yeah, I would say so. Sometimes some things I get pushed back on are, older generation of people are more reluctant to use mobile, for example. One of the great things about Konko is you can always fall back and rely on desktop if you need to, albeit mobile is probably where most people will use our tool. But you need to be adaptable. And I don't think you can force mobile on people that aren't used to it. And so you need to be aware that different people have different needs, and you maybe need to adapt that rollout plan to suit different personnel.
Thank you. So Lisa, international VAT is, from my experience, an absolute minefield in terms of, as you alluded to before, the different tax legislations around the globe. What advice could you give to companies that have a high level of international VAT, whether it be on expenses or invoices, what they could do to improve their global tax management processes and reclaim?
Well, get in touch with TaxBack International. So no, I mean, they really have to keep up to date with the legislation. And unfortunately, while we have an EU VAT directive, each individual member state in Europe has then its own rules and regulations, its own filing deadlines, its own control lists, its own SAFT requirements, its own real-time reporting. So, I mean, it really is the minefield that you talk about, and it seems to be getting worse because there is this move to the combat of VAT fraud, and every individual country and member state are adopting their own approach to that. And so that just means more technological controls are being put in place, really, and so it's really difficult for businesses to keep up to date. And so and we are seeing countries, for example, India have such a the whole GST system is based around technology, and we could really learn a lot from them, because they're moving towards a place where there'll be automatic population of the VAT return based on your suppliers' sales that they are reporting, and so kind of automatic reconciliation, automatic population, the doing away of the traditional VAT return. So that's kind of the way the world is moving, and it really is technology based, and it will be a real struggle for businesses to keep up.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Really interesting thoughts there. So I think what I'd really like from the panel is some advice that they would give to anyone looking to buy new technology to solve a business challenge in their business, whether it be expense or invoice products or anything else that they are looking to improve their processes. Could we start with you, John?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really important to have a very clear goal of what you want to achieve, the problem you want to solve, but also to consider what your business is going to look like and what challenges you might face in 12 or 24 months' time as well. It's incredible how many businesses I speak to that have gone out and bought software and 1 or 2 years down the line are having to completely rethink it and change it because their business has changed. So I would say it's important to consider the short and long-term goals of your business and make sure you choose an application or solution that fits all of those requirements.
Thank you. Justina?
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore with Don. It's to have that clear vision what you're trying to achieve, and think big. I think from the rapid growth with Ion, we learned for sure that like we need to think really big. We tend to kind of use this PDCA approach, which is like plan, which is what is your actual scope, the focus, what you're trying to achieve, but instead of just saying like, automate a repetitive process, you have to say like, oh, actually, I'm trying to achieve X amount time on my teams, and I want to scale, and I want to become a global company that like travels within around the globe and uses different devices for like submitting their expenses. So you have to really kind of detail out your like minimum requirements that you fully understand. Then you do. Once you have your fully end goal, like and a lot of times it's actually like the do is kind of a phased approach. Don't like how do you eat an elephant? Do you like have to cut it in small pieces? So you need to execute efficiently in line with your plan. Actually, a good example, ourselves, Ion, we started last year with 7 completely independent Concur platforms, and like our goal was before we can actually even think any bigger, we said, well, we need to consolidate. So we took that phased approach that we're saying, okay, well, we're going to spend 2019 and we're going to consolidate. So we finished 2019 with only 3 platforms, which obviously was a huge achievement, but now we can kind of think and scale and build on top. Then constantly check quality testing. You always need to revert back and do kind of, did we achieve what we planned to? Are we moving the right direction? So then any kind of change request becomes way more easier to tackle and to kind of keep up with it. If we get a new kind of a massive business change or market changes completely, I think the good example with something, those unknowns, like with the COVID-19 virus now and all is that going to bring. So we always have to be able to be flexible. So I think when you choose the system as well, just don't overcomplicate and rely on the system and go with the kind of system standard, which is based on the best practice and it's fully tested and it's fully supportive. Then everything becomes much easier. You can scale easily. The adoption rate is high because you can rely on say for SAP Concur, they have tons of training videos and documentation published to their clients that can be used all the time. But if we go off on our own and kind of really customize it or make it like heavily dependent on the business processes that we have and they're really unique for some reason, all of that goes away and it becomes very hard to maintain it.
Thank you, Justina. Lisa?
Yeah, just to add, I think businesses maybe should look for solutions that provide more complete end-to-end services, so you're not dealing with lots of different unrelated service providers would be one thing to look at. The partnership that TaxBack has with SAP Concur began 11 years ago, and so our processes have kind of evolved and harmonized to meet the needs of our customers kind of on a wider range of services.
Thank you. So some really interesting points from the panel. What I'd like to do now is open up to the questions from the audience. So I'll start with the first question is regarding cybersecurity. With hacks and ransoms can cripple a company. What does the panel recommend? With supercomputers out there, what protection can go up against them? John, would you like to take this one just regarding some of the security available to businesses when buying new technology? and some of the things that a company should look out for?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, when I'm working with businesses, we're always quite forthcoming with all of our security credentials. But you'd be surprising how many people don't actually ask me for it. So I think it's really important when you're looking at new bits of software that, as well as considering things like, the product and how fit it is for purpose, pricing, implementation, security should be right up there with all of those things. And you should take it really, really seriously. And you should be asking each of the software vendors to provide you with a document outlining that. We do it quite proactively, but I'm not sure that businesses are actually asking for it if people don't do that. So that would be my advice. Make it part of the key things that you're looking for when analyzing and evaluating a new piece of software.
In your opinion, where should that particular part of the process be? And checking data security and those types of topics.
I think as early on as possible. You don't want to evaluate 5, 10 software vendors, get down to a final 3 and realize that all of them are lacking in that area, because you're going to have to go back and start again. So as early on in the process as possible, I'd be putting that question out there and asking for that documentation so that you don't waste your own time more than anything.
Okay. Justina, do you have any experience with data and security of software vendors?
Yeah, no, we do, and it's becoming more and more of I wouldn't say an issue, but more kind of like a hot topic. We started doing we call an info securities review of the vendors. Which before we actually decide to go with any of the vendors, we carry out the info security test first, because the sad reality, a lot of the companies are failed to be compliant, and it's probably hard to keep up with all the regulations coming into place. I think it's very important to select your strategic partners in the beginning. So we're quite confident with SAP Concur, and we can scale easily, and we can be confident to use any additional modules or services, because we have completely tested, they're completely compliant, and they're keeping up with that, and they have all the proof to show that they're keeping up with all the regulations. So I think it's very important to make that strategic decision, to think ahead, and to think how if this data security kind of coming about now that it's very heavily. So like in another 5 years time, I can only imagine how heavy the data security topic is going to be.
Thank you. So we have a bit of time at the end of the session to answer a few more of the remaining questions, but I think at this point, I'd like to say a really big thank you to our panelists, Lisa, Justina, and John. If you have any further questions, please continue to post them in the chat. We will look to answer all of them after the conference. And up next is our guest speaker, Gerald Ashley. And as a strategy, decision, and risk expert, Gerald will be talking about how the lack of data and analysis can lead to poor strategic decisions and ultimately business risk.
Angus, good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction, and hello to everybody. I hope you can hear me all okay. And it's a shame we're not at the Ritz Hotel, I suppose, and that's one of the problems with coronavirus. As Angus just mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about risk versus uncertainty, and why that's important, and some of the lessons we can learn. And been listening to the panel over the last few, 45 minutes. To me, it's quite interesting that your business is a classic example of where you need both technology and the human touch. And normally, if you don't get that balance right, you either underperform or you hit serious problems. I should start by apologizing by saying my background is in banking. So you might think I've got a bit of a cheat talking to you guys about risk. But over time, bankers are getting better at risk, or hopefully. And in my defense, it's a long time since I was actually involved in it. So that's my defense. So anyhow, here we are. My talk today, From Here to Uncertainty. And it's to really say that the moment you step forward into the future, you have a range of possibilities and probabilities of what might happen. Some things are particularly predictable and many are particularly not. Now, you have to be of a certain age, I have to say, to remember this. This picture here is of a little guy, well, he's not that little, on a desert island, and he's fishing. And this was actually, it's one half of an advertisement that used to appear in the sort of big international glossy magazines like The Economist, Newsweek, that sort of thing, back in the late 80s, early 90s. And it was by an American bank called Bankers Trust. And they used to run this on the back cover or inside cover of The Economist for quite a number of years. And that all looks pretty straightforward. The little guy's fishing, a bit lonely with only 3 palm trees. But of course, it's not the full picture. The full picture is this. Turns out that he's sitting on an enormous fish that he didn't realize. And if he gets a bite, he's going to be in for a bit of a shock. Now, a couple of interesting things about this picture, other than the humor, is the strap line. Risk, it isn't always where you expect it to be. Now, that's a lesson from 30 years ago, but it could have been a lesson from 300 years ago or many millennia, and it's always going to be that type of situation. The twist in the story here is that Bankers Trust were very successful at marketing a risk management program, a very early one in the late 80s, but ironically got into difficulty and made large losses because of poor risk management. It turned out that maybe their marketing and selling of the product was actually better than the implementation and use of it. They ended up being bought by Deutsche Bank, and what had been a very large name has now completely disappeared. A lot of what I want to talk to you today is going to be a bit historic. We've already gone back to the 1990s, and bear with me, I'm going to go back a little bit earlier now to the Second World War. Some of you may be familiar with this diagram or not, but it's a great illustration of how to think about risk and how to think about how we make decisions, and also the interface between tools and software and sort of human thought. So a little story about the Second World War. When the Americans joined in on the bombing campaign that had already started by the RAF, bombing of Germany, I think the Americans probably started in about late 1942 into 1943. The roles were divided in that the British, who had been at it a lot longer, did nighttime bombing, and the Americans did daytime bombing. And very quickly, the Americans found that they were getting much higher levels of losses, disproportionately so. At first, they thought, well, maybe it is much more dangerous trying to do bombing raids during the day, but there's no doubt that they were suffering a great deal. So this story's on the net if you want to read it up, but there was a guy at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, called Abram Wald. He was a sort of very early sort of maths and decision research geek, I suppose, who was asked to analyze what was going on with American bombers. This isn't an actual example, but it's a sort of mocked up version of some of the results he came up with. And what they did was, in a very detailed and careful manner, they logged all the damage on the planes after the bombing raids. And then they mocked it all up, and as you can see here, this picture of this bomber where there's lots of purple dots everywhere, that was signs of very large amounts of damage and potentially a great worry. Now, it would be very easy to look at a diagram like this and say, oh, I can see where all the problems are. Look at the wings. I mean, they've been shot to pieces. And the tailplane and even the fuselage is in really bad shape. So that's where we need to concentrate our effort, in maybe strengthening the airframe or doing something to lessen that damage. Wald's great insight, and this is maybe the difference between data and insight, was in fact that is completely the wrong conclusion. The correct conclusion is to concentrate on the areas that haven't got any damage. Because remember, these are the planes that made it back from their bombing raid and were able to be analyzed. So this is a classic example of the not seeing the full data set. Some of you may have heard of the phrase, the black swan. What's happened here is all the planes that didn't make it back from Germany were hit in the white areas. Quite naturally, both engine cowlings and the sort of flight deck and front end where the bomb aimer is. So just having the data is only ever half the story, because you have to kind of make the right decisions. And I think this is just a nice little illustration that sometimes a sort of little mental trick when you're trying to think about the future and, dare one say, predicting or forecasting things, is to sort of turn the data upside down on its head and ask the question, what are we missing here? What am I not seeing? What is this data not telling me, rather than just what it is telling me? This is a little bit like Sherlock Holmes' story of Silver Blaze, the dog that didn't bark in the night. And here's another example of a dog not barking. So a little history story, but just a nice way to think about risk and decision making. Coming in a little bit further forward, and I was quite struck by some of the comments by the panel today, is that technology, when it changes, seems to go through sort of 4 phases, and a variety of different people tend to be either early, in the middle, or late to the party. That may be from a sort of managerial sort of mindset. It may even be company policy in some ways. But if we take the view that there are faint signals of a new technology, the sort of stuff that may still be in universities and laboratories, it then gets turned into some early products. So we start to see the emergence of some products. I think you can all think of the examples in your industry. I think of something like 3D printing, for example. 3D printing was around in universities and labs for donkey's years, but it took a while for it to really become scalable and effective and efficient, and then suddenly it started to emerge. Now, after emergence, we get rapid change because we get take-up by the vast majority of the marketplace, and then it becomes, in time, an established product. That, I think, is a fairly straightforward sort of roadmap for how people might look at technologies, and I would have thought must be very typical of the sort of patterns you were seeing. I listening earlier of people talking about the emergence of AI. I'm not certain that a lot of AI is what is called AI really is. It's probably more to do with machine learning, but nevertheless, we're way past the faint signals and emergence. I think we are starting to get into some form of rapid change of making much more effective and efficient use of the data. Now, along the bottom, I put the sort of green and red camp, and in the green camp, we've got people who are kind of alert to these faint signals. Some of the very largest companies, of course, have quite strong academic links, and they're often very involved in the development of the early technologies. And then once it starts to take off, they're well placed to accelerate those technologies and to benefit, and obviously to benefit their clients. And then in time, I was quite interested, again, people saying a big thing about any of these technologies is integration with what's already in the marketplace. And that is really a key to when something becomes really well established, that it is properly integrated into the new business universe, if you like. And there we are, all lovely and perfect. if you're of the mindset, well, faint signals, who knows, who cares, academics have strange ideas, they're going nowhere, where very true, you may have 100 ideas of which only 2 or 3 are really effective, but it may still be worth just keeping an eye on what's coming. When it starts to emerge, you sometimes get people who defend their complacency by disbelieving it, saying, oh, it's a flash in the pan, it's not going to happen, what does it actually solve? Suddenly the world around them changes, and we've all had experience of when the world moves, how fast it can be. And now this is where we get into the uncertainty phase often, where people say, well, I don't know if are we too late? Should we joint venture? Can we hurry up and catch up? And then by the time we get to an established market and all your competitors are integrated and well established, is it too late? And I think this is a pattern that is increasingly important, so that the tools and what develops and the software and the new technologies are obviously important, but it's absolutely critical the way managements, senior managers, middle management, quite the way down through an organization, think about these sort of patterns. So that one to hold in your mind. Slightly dated again. I just want to quickly go over some of the ideas of what we might call the classic risk management territory. A lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this. So you have a particular event or a particular problem, and it's the typical thing to do is to put it on a grid of likelihood of it causing maybe losses or failure or complete collapse of something, and how likely is that? And across the x-axis, across the bottom, well, what will its impact be? So is it actually fairly trivial? Is it serious? Or is it, maybe life-threatening or threatening to the viability of the business? Now, the top right-hand corner is the one that everybody focuses on because, look, this is highly likely, and we know it will have a big impact on our business. So quite naturally, you have to take action. Now, there are problems here on the vertical axis, this phrase likelihood, or if you like, a little bit more precisely, probability. Who decides what is low, medium, and high, and how do you decide whether it's low, medium, and high? Typically, people look to analyze past data. And if you are in an area that has got large amounts of quite consistent data over a period of time, that is a reasonable way to do it. But unfortunately, life can be a bit more complicated, and we've got good data, we can see quite high probabilities, and we know it's going to really affect our business, so we can take action or we can mitigate in some form or another. So that's risk. The more complex one, or the more difficult one to deal with, is uncertainty. Same grid of likelihood versus impact, but this time it might be a low likelihood, but with a high impact. We might have been having this talk in, say, December, and somebody said, well, there's always talk there's going to be some form of epidemic or pandemic, and it would have been reasonable to say, well, the last one that sticks in people's minds is the SARS outbreak in, I think it's 03-04, where in fact, if you look back at the data, the UK, there are a very small number of cases. I think may have even been in single figures, and nobody died. So you may have then said, well, this is one of these sort of sci-fi film things. It could happen. Everybody goes on about Spanish flu, but that's now exactly 100 years ago, and medical technology and drugs and all the rest of it are far better. But equally, you could say we're in a much more connected world. So here you can see the problem if you're in a business that doesn't have good access to consistent data. And this is why our hosts today are in the business of aggregating data and collecting tools together to make new products. This is what they are trying to tackle or can help tackle. In some circumstances, if the data is not available, there's very little you can do. And in fact, when we hear this phrase, or there's a great deal of uncertainty in the marketplace, or business conditions, there's a great deal of uncertainty, the problem is people are searching around trying to find a sort of template for what would be a reasonable approach to dealing with things. And it's quite difficult to do if you have low amounts of data. I just said, or I gave an impression, well, there's very little you can do. I think actually there are some lessons we can learn from this and how to tackle it, which brings me to my next very up-to-date slide, which is based on some work from 1921. So this may seem like sort of a historic sort of run round the topic today, but it really is to illustrate that all these problems have been around for a very long time, and that quite a number of people have given a lot of thought to this in the past. And I'm a great believer you can learn a lot from what's gone before when people have looked at problems like this. This is something called Knightian uncertainty. It's named after an American economist called Frank Knight, who I think it's probably fair to say very few people have heard of these days. He was a very important figure in the 1920s and 30s, but is largely forgotten because he was probably the second best or second most well-known economist in the world, the first being John Maynard Keynes. And it's amazing, even people who know very little about finance or economics or business have heard of John Maynard Keynes. Virtually nobody has heard about Frank Knight. Now, Frank Knight wrote a book 99 years ago called Risk, Uncertainty and Profit. It's a very long, detailed, and it has to be said, not very exciting read. But we can distill some of the messages into this one graph. What this graph is saying is that on the vertical axis, we've got information. And on the horizontal x-axis, we seem to move from total certainty to risk to what he termed Knightian uncertainty. And not certain his branding was particularly successful. I don't hear many people going around talking about Knightian uncertainty. That said, if you do want to read academic papers, there's quite a lot of stuff on this. And if you want a more sort of general understanding of thinking on it, the Bank of England actually has produced some quite readable and non-technological guides to this idea. So what's going on here? If we lived in a world where we have 100% data, 100% information, we would have total certainty. There would be no risk because we know exactly what's going to happen next. Now, I know there will be philosophers who will say, well, of course, nothing is 100% certain. That's absolutely impossible. There's Gödel's incompleteness theorem in mathematics and all the rest of it. You cannot prove anything with 100% certainty. True, but let's just put that aside for one moment. There are a lot of things where we have a very high degree of certainty because we've got large amounts of past data and they operate on a very, very regular cycle. One of the best examples of this would be sunset and sunrise or tide tables. We know with a degree of enormous accuracy what the tide will be like in the River Plate tomorrow at Montevideo or in Southend-on-Sea here, and when the sun sets later today in Canada, and when the sun next comes up in Japan, because we've got large amounts of past data that it's not much of a risk to make that prediction. If you want to be particularly obtuse, you can point out eventually in however many billion years it is, the sun will explode and then there will be no tides and no sunrises and sunsets. But with that notable exception, I think we can say there's a large degree of certainty of what's going on. Right down the other end, I've labeled something called complete ignorance. Now, complete ignorance, some of you may recall the rather tortured press conference by Donald Rumsfeld when he talked about unknown unknowns. And what he was really saying was that where there's zero information on something, there is complete ignorance. That's not to say one is stupid or not thinking, but you simply don't know what you don't know. As we're doing this webcast now, perhaps an asteroid is hurtling towards the Earth. It hasn't been spotted, and maybe we don't make it past lunchtime. That would be an extreme example of complete ignorance. Now, like most things in life, most things sit in the middle. And this is where we've got this idea of risk and uncertainty. What Frank Knight was trying to say was that as you go down that triangle, you've still got fairly large amounts of information, maybe 80 or 90% data sets, and you can still make reasonable assumptions and reasonable predictions and forecasts about risk. As you start sliding down into the 40s, 30s, 20s, it is starting to become more sort of finger in the air stuff. There just simply isn't enough data to make very accurate predictions. How all of this is relevant to all of your businesses, I think, is illustrated by this fact here, that as we slide down from 100% to zero, it becomes harder and harder to make sensible, coherent business decisions. But equally, if you can climb up that triangle, you, by gaining more information, you're in a better place. Maybe it's via just narrative information or actually economic and numeric data. You can make better decisions and you can be closer to the goal of being really certain about things. To illustrate this, think about life insurance. As you go up this triangle, you actually make more money. This is a way to make money. So if you were to try and insure one person for life insurance, depending on their age and their health and their general well-being, you've only got a certain amount of information as to whether they're going to live to the end of today or they're going to live into their 70s, 80s, or 90s. One single data point about one person's health is really an uncertainty. If you can bundle together a large number of uncertainties and create a portfolio, you can get a distribution around the data you receive, and you effectively turn an uncertainty into a risk. And that's where you make money. That is essentially the life insurance industry. Now, you could say in the particular area we've been talking about today, the ability to aggregate and to make better use of data, you are gaining new information. And that should be a profitable, and in my view, is very highly likely to be a profitable exercise. It may be profitable in a number of ways. It may be in purely monetary terms. It may just be in terms of reducing costs and efficiencies. And most certainly, it will reduce the amount of management time of pondering, wondering, and fretting about things. So more information is always a good thing. And just look at the industries around the world and make tens of billions of dollars out of selling us information. Probably the one in the news at the moment that we all notice is, of course, Michael Bloomberg, who transformed the bond market. He was just a bond sales guy at Merrill Lynch, but he transformed it by saying that if you could aggregate the data and create new analytical tools and then sell them to what effectively were his competitors, you might actually have a better business than being in the investment bank itself. And I think in his case, that's been proven. So the whole lesson of what I want to get over to you today, is the importance of trying to gain more information, either through new analytics, new data tool sets, better ways of integrating things. Information is the key to making money. In this last sort of 10 minutes or so, I just want to bore you with another graph, which I think is also quite important in terms of thinking about the business world and, again, back to risk and uncertainty. There is a science out there called complexity science, and sometimes called complex adaptive systems. And this is the idea of trying to see is there a sweet spot where networks are at their most efficient? And so on this graph, we've got two different axes now. We've got resilience, which I'm calling the ability to withstand a shock without a catastrophic impact. So in other words, how much of a hit can you as an individual or as a business take? It may be a financial hit, I suppose. That is probably the best way to think about it. At the moment, with the stock markets being somewhat exciting, are you close to your pain level? How resilient are you to be able to take a loss? Or for that matter, just imagine the decisions and discussions going on at the airlines at the moment. How resilient can they be to, a large fall off in their passenger numbers? Let me just advance that. Now, what we find is that if there's very little connectivity in a network or in a firm, or everything is sort of jumbled about and not very well integrated, there's very little resilience. It makes sense to be organized. There's definitely makes sense to be organized, and a large part of being organized is the old phrase of everything being joined up and being properly integrated and working well. Now, paradoxically, if we are overly connected, the resilience can fall. The example I've always used over the last couple of years is the fact that there have been examples of probably mainly teenagers hacking into mobile phones and then playing around with people's appliances in the kitchen because they've got a fridge that is linked to their phone. And there's so many ways now you can link your life. And maybe we ask the question with this virus at the moment: can we be overly connected? Can we just be too connected? And you will see that the standard approach that I think governments and authorities are going to take in terms of trying to reduce the risk from coronavirus is essentially to slightly disconnect a little bit, to put some brakes into the system. This may be sort of sealing off the country to an extent, like Italy, or certain parts, or getting people to self-isolate, or for that matter, as we've done today, just taken a prudent step of saying, well, it's a shame we're not in the West End, but we can do this on a virtual basis. And in a sense, we've slightly broken up the connectivity. It's obviously not so much social action this way or activity this way because we're doing it in a virtual environment. And when we get overly connected, we this is going to advance or not? Yeah, we are. We can have what's called a stressed system, so that if one thing goes wrong, it's like dominoes. We get a domino effect. And so increased connectivity, or maybe more precisely where we start to feel we're overly connected, increases turbulence and volatility, and that in turn reduces resilience. That is the exact point at which governments and authorities are facing now about the current virus. What is the sensible place to be? Now, in terms of your business, if you've been trying to turn your uncertainties into risks, and so you're trying to get more information and more integrated, somehow you've got to try and find the sweet spot somewhere up there in the middle. That will not be a perfect spot, but you certainly don't want to be too much to the left or too much to the right. This is a slightly academic way of looking at it, but your people who know their businesses would be wise, certainly in their business plans, to think about all the networks and dependencies they have within their overall business. But bearing in mind, we want to have a situation where through gaining data, you can be more efficient and more profitable. I mentioned Sherlock Holmes earlier, and just to pretty much close off, here are three little thoughts from Sherlock Holmes, or Conan Doyle to be more precise. First one, it's a capital mistake to theorize before you have all the evidence. It biases the judgment. Well, we all want to or we all fall into the trap sometimes of knowing the answer we want and then back engineering to find the data that will fit it. And hopefully we're wise and alive to that. And I quite like this one, which again is everything's coming back to coronavirus at the moment. I think it's just in front of all our minds. So all life is a great chain, the nature of which is known whenever we are shown a link of it. So again, it's about how we can climb up that data and information triangle. And here's a good one to finish with. There is nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact, which brings us back to the bomber and Abraham Wald. I will finish now, and I'll finish on a quote. One last one here. There's a little risk decision checklist. Gather the data, analyze, decide, but consider the context and the potential unknowns, and keep questioning and trying to find more data. A quote to finish with: we tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. I think that is very important and very well worth remembering. Well, I hope that's been of interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerald, for that very interesting talk. We'll now have a short... Thank you, Gerald, for that very interesting talk. We'll now have a short break for 10 minutes and reconvene at 13:25, where Abby Heller, our Senior Solutions Consultant at SAP Concur, will talk us through efficient business spend management with a live demo and Q&A. Thank you. See you back at 13:25.
Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me okay. It's now 1:30, so hopefully you've enjoyed the comfort break just there. I want to introduce myself before I start. So my name is Abby Heller. I'm one of the senior solution consultants here at SAP Concur. Been within the SMB part of the UK business now for about 5.5 years. So really working with organisations anywhere between kind of 10 employees right up to almost the 1,000 mark. So within the next half an hour, I'll be taking you through a demonstration of the Concur services, showing how they'll be able to help streamline your processes and increase efficiency. Just before we dive into the demonstration, I wanted to give a bit of an overview as to the platform that Concur does provide, so the technology we provide. So we are an integrated solution. So we are a cloud-based platform formed of 3 key services. So we have the expense, the supplier invoice, and the travel services. And what we certainly found from a report is that 81% of finance leaders said they don't have sufficient insight into these processes in a more manual world. So by having it on a single platform, it does increase the amount of visibility that our clients get. Within this demonstration, we will be focusing on the expense and the supplier invoice elements of our service. With that in mind, I was looking to take you through a event. So we're going to start from the start before the event even takes place. And we'll be looking at how an individual within the business can request the room hire for that event, get that request approved. We'll then move through more to the actual day of the event. So we're looking at how, when on the road, that individual can collate their expenses. And then upon returning, how we deal with the capturing of the invoice for that event. And then we'll move through to more after the event has occurred. So obviously approvals for the expenses and the invoices, and also how finance or processors will be looking to be processing that information into any relevant finance or ERP systems. So as mentioned, we're going to start off by looking at before the event occurs. Now, in a more manual world, it may be that these requests are handled through a kind of paper process or a very manual process. With Concur, we do offer the ability to raise purchase requests. So this offers an extra level of control and visibility for organizations around spend that's due to occur. So all you'd simply do in order to raise a request is log into the Concur service through our web-based platform. So every user will have their own unique username and password. And then you'll really be looking to navigate to the requests tab that you'll see there at the top. Now, we keep this very simple interface. So you'll notice on the right-hand side, you have the cart view, almost like a shopping cart for those of you that are familiar with online shopping. And then it's really going to ask the individual to provide information around what they're looking to procure, what they're requesting. So you'll notice that they'll need to fill in information like the supplier. And right off the bat, we have a control around loading in your approved supplier list, so ensuring people aren't buying from any suppliers that are outside of those approved supplier lists. They can then choose that supplier, and that is going to populate information such as the expense type. So if you regularly are procuring the same goods or services from that supplier, we'll actually default that to a relevant GL code. As you can see here, it's defaulted to catering. The user can then enter other information, important information. So information such as description, quantity, the amounts, and the unit of measure. You could continue to add other items to that request, but just for the purposes of time, they would hit request for that room hire. And then that will take them through to an additional screen whereby they will provide further information for the individual that is going to be approving this request. So at this stage, they can ensure this request is going to be allocated to correct cost centers that may be relevant. So here we have some example event cost centers that this needs to be coded to. You'll also notice on the left-hand side how they can ensure the ship to and bill to addresses for this request are correct. And at that stage, once they've done that, they can hit submit, and that is going to then route this request through to the relevant approver. The other great thing about this being an online system is that it is going to keep the users informed as to the stage that this request is at. So rather than them having to chase to see whether the approver's reviewing it, they will always get an updated status on these requests. We can see for this newly submitted request, it is just informing them it's pending approval with that individual. So if we look at this then from the approver's perspective, once that request has been approved, it's key to mention that this can be reviewed both on the web and the mobile application. So they would just get a view into all of the details that the requester or the individual provided there at that purchase request stage. And then they have the options to either send that request back, or they can approve it, in which case it would then allow them to generate a purchase order. And with our example here of our event, that approver is happy to approve that room hire amount, and then they can raise the purchase order from within the service. Obviously, the purchase order can be branded with your own unique logos and T's and C's, and then it can be transmitted directly from within the Concur service. And that will be delivered as a PDF attachment to an email to the relevant supplier. Once that's been transmitted, the purchase order will be sat waiting in Concur for the subsequent invoice to come through that it can subsequently be matched through to. So let's imagine that the day of the event has arrived, and our individual is obviously going to be traveling to that event. Now, because they are not in the office, they're traveling, this is where the mobile element really comes into play. I was actually reading a Deloitte survey this morning, so it was some 2019 data here. It was mentioned that now within the UK, we have 88% usership of smartphone devices within the UK. So for those individuals traveling with their mobile applications, I'm going to touch on a number of ways that they will be able to be capturing this information, this travel information, as they're on the road. It's also worth mentioning that in addition to our own Concur application, there are a number of partner apps, or what we refer to as a kind of ecosystem of partners that can link into or integrate with Concur and provide additional value for businesses. So you'll see some of those logos here on screen. So from the business travel side, very much providers such as Uber, some of the accommodation partners you'll see on screen there. It's also worth mentioning that this ecosystem of partners also stretches to partners that can deliver value for the organization. So you may notice some of the data integration partners listed on screen. And for those of you that do international travel as well, we have partners that can help with even VAT reclaim, non-domestic VAT reclaim. Let's imagine for our individual, they are going to drive to the venue for this event. So in a manual kind of paper-based process, this is the kind of thing that will very much be compiled at the end of the trip, often through people checking on Google Maps and then entering it into a spreadsheet or something similar. For our individual, using Concur here, they can just go into the mileage part of the Concur application. And you'll notice we have a couple options for logging our mileage. So we have the enter manually option. So that does utilize Google Maps. So they would enter their waypoints and it would work out the mileage that's taking place. We also have something called Concur Drive, and that's what I'm just going to touch on here. So Concur Drive actually uses GPS to track the mileage. So there's two options with Concur Drive. We have the user-initiated option. So at the start of their trip, they would hit start, and at the end of their trip, they would hit stop. And we also have the scheduled option, which is my preference, because you only need to set this once, and then you can forget about it. But in essence, you can set the days of the week that you want this to be tracking, and any relevant times of the week that you would want this tracking. So if you would likely turn off Saturday and Sunday if you don't work at weekends. What we find is that on average in the UK, 33% of TD spend is actually on mileage. So it's really important to ensure this is tracked accurately. And That's exactly what the GPS tracker affords you as a business, because it will accurately track the exact journey that's taken place. We can see here in our claim, it will create a personal car mileage line item for the claimant at the end of their trip. They can also build in their vehicle information into their profile. So you'll notice it has logged that as £10.35 per journey, and that is based on their engine size and fuel type, and you can set the relevant mileage rate that's applicable for them as a user. And here we can see the view of the tracked mileage. So even at the approval stage and the processor stage, when we come to that, it's really going to offer that visibility into the trip and avoids any risk of exaggeration occurring for that mileage. So let's imagine once they've completed the mileage, they're going to park their vehicle. So as we can see within our claim, we do have parking. And I just want to talk around how this parking has come to be within our expense claim here. So you'll notice under the amount of £1.90, there's a little icon of a corporate card. So in addition to capturing out-of-pocket cash expenses, which I'll come on to in a moment, we can also capture expenses that have been paid for on a corporate card. So we can set up a direct card feed with the majority of the major banks, certainly within the UK and wider globally. And within, say, 48 hours of that spend occurring on the card, it will actually pull it through and populate a line item on behalf of the traveller, of the individual, as you see it here. So you can see it's captured information such as the expense type, dates, amount, and the currency, of course. What we often hear from finance, I guess you can say a real bugbear for finance teams, is chasing for receipts for card spend that is centrally settled by the business. There's not really that incentive for claimants to be providing those receipts. So the other thing to mention is for card spend, users will get reminder emails that they need to be providing a receipt for this parking. And it will actually, when they capture the receipt, do what we refer to as a smart match. So it will recognize the information on the receipt, aligns to the parking transaction that's come through from the card feed, and it will attach that receipt automatically to the line item for the claimant. Parking is also a really good point for me to just refer briefly to how we calculate VAT within the system as well. So you may notice at the bottom here, it has a field called parking type, and that will really force the claimant in that instance to select whether that parking was off-street or on-street parking. So we have a number of these VAT rules built into the service against relevant expense types. And by forcing them to enter that information, it's really driving the service to work out on their behalf whether VAT can be reclaimed or not. And obviously, the other additional information that will be important here will be the receipt status field and the country of purchase. So let's imagine as our traveller continues on this business trip, that they're going to purchase themselves some breakfast. So for this, I really want to talk around the foundation of how expenses will enter the system. Obviously, we've looked there at mileage with the GPS tracker in the app and talked around the card fee. But the majority of expenses will be coming through from capturing the physical receipt. So you'll notice within the application there at the bottom, there is Expense It, the little camera functionality. What that will allow users to do is simply capture a picture of their receipt. It will scan that receipt through OCR technology, and it will analyze it. So from a user perspective, all they'll need to do is snap a picture, and then they can actually put their phone away and throw that paper receipt away. So in the UK, we're lucky that we can have electronic record keeping. And from there, using that OCR technology, it's actually going to scan the receipt and populate a line item on behalf of that claimant. So we can see it has done just that. And if we click into that line item, you'll see the information that's been populated is information such as the expense type, the date, the amount, and again, the currency and country. You may wonder how it's classed that as a breakfast expense. So our OCR technology also uses machine learning. So it will look at the time of day on the receipt and the number of items on the receipt, and even the supplier that that's come from to determine is that a breakfast lunch or a subsistence dinner. You may also notice within our expense claim that it's warning us that there is an expense within the claim that exceeds the limit outlined in the company policy. So in the UK, approximately 22 of T&E spend is on average out of policy. And for a lot of organisations that we engage with, they're looking at automating their expenses as an opportunity to tighten up on policies that maybe have always been in place, but not adhered to by individuals within the business. So if we look at that client entertainment expense, we will see that it has that flag against it. And in that instance, you could ask the claimant to provide a comment explaining why they've spent that much on that client entertainment. If you wanted to be a bit more strict around that, there is also the opportunity to introduce hard stops where they wouldn't be able to submit that claim at all unless they reduce the amount down to something a bit more appropriate for what's deemed acceptable by the business. So that's how we can help comply with internal policy rules. If we're thinking more broadly around external compliance, again, client entertainment is a really good example of this because, again, here in the UK, there are a number of rules that businesses need to adhere to, one of which would be the UK Bribery Act. So for client entertaining, it's really important that it's capturing around who the attendees were, and of course as well the business purpose. So every client entertainment expense will have those as mandatory fields. So you'll be able to enter in the attendees, the individuals that were attending that client entertainment, and as well the business purpose would need to be entered. Unless they provide that information, this claim will not be able to progress to the next stage of the process. So at this stage, our claimant or our traveller can look to submit their claim, and then that's going to be routed through to the next stage in the process. But if we just recap there on the number of ways that the expense claim has built itself, so from the GPS tracker, the mileage, the card feed for the corporate card spend on the parking there, and also through capturing receipts through the OCR technology. All of this really saves time for those travellers, for those claimants. And we have some great examples of that. So one I always like to mention is a non-for-profit that we work with in London. Their claimants were spending around 2 to 3 hours per month on their expenses prior to implementing Concur. And once they automated that, it was reduced down to, on average, 30 minutes per month. So a massive time saving there for their staff to be focusing on other responsibilities. Something I just wanted to touch on, just prior to the claim going through to the line manager approval, is an audit service that Concur offer. So this, as I mentioned, would occur after the claimant submits the claim, but prior to it going through to the approval. And the reason we have it at this stage is what we typically hear in a more manual paper process is claims will often make it through all the way to finance team, and then they may pick up on some discrepancies and return it to claimants. So by having the audit service at this stage, it really ensures that the claim isn't going through all those different steps in the process and then being returned. So this is a human service. The team is based in the UK, in Sittingbourne in Kent. And I've just listed there on screen the checks that they would do against every single receipt. One thing I wanted to mention was that with this service across our client base, we have a 20% failure rate. So that's where claims will be returned to our clients or to our claimants. And of that 20%, 63% of those failures were down to the receipt status being incorrect. So where a claimant may have said it was a VAT receipt, it actually was a credit card slip. So that was being picked up on early on. It would affect the VAT calculations in Concur, so it's really important that that is correct and can be addressed at that stage. Okay. So sticking with the stage of on the day of the event. So let's imagine that event has occurred. And at the end of the event, the venue for which the room hire occurred is going to send through the invoice for that room hire. So I wanted to talk around how that capturing of that invoice occurs, how that invoice would enter the Concur service. So for invoices that are emailed, we can provide a Concur specific email address, example of that given on screen here. If it's a physical or posted invoice, there's a couple options. You can either continue to receive them to your office, scan them and email them to the Concur specific email address, or you can provide your suppliers with a designated PO box address that they can use. Once we receive those invoices through either of those means, we are, again, going to run these through OCR technology. So similar to what we were looking at on the expense side. So the invoice will be scanned with OCR technology, and we can see on screen the information that that will attempt to pick up on. So supplier information, checking that it is one of those approved suppliers. Header level information, so PO numbers, invoice numbers, dates, amounts, VAT. It will pick up on the invoice image as well, as you see there on the right-hand side. And then finally, any line item detail presented on the invoice, so descriptions, quantities, and amounts of particular importance there. Now, in addition to the OCR technology, we offer a secondary step to that, which we refer to as a verification step, because OCR technology isn't going to be 100% accurate 100% of the time. So what that verification step provides is a member of our team checking that that information that's being picked up is correct. And if it hasn't been picked up correctly, they will actually amend it. If it's been missed, they will enter that information. So it's just really reducing the amount of checks and data entry that often would fall to the AP team within the finance team. And we typically find the OCR technology alone will reduce processing times by 50 to 75% for our invoice clients. Remember as well, I mentioned earlier that the purchase orders would stay residing in Concur once transmitted. It's also worth mentioning that in addition to purchase orders, you can also enter any relevant goods receipt information. So confirmation, in this instance, that that event took place. And that is ultimately going to form part of that matching process. So it's key to mention that that matching process is automated. Again, that will be something that's very much a manual check in a paper-based world. But here, it will actually do that matching automatically. So checking what was originally requested, what was received against the invoice record that's come through. So in this instance, we can see that it's a fully matched invoice, so it's perfectly matched the purchase order with its receipt information. If that is a mismatch, again, that would be flagged and highlighted and could then be checked. Earlier on, where the purchase request was being compiled and it was allocated to relevant event cost center, you can also copy down that cost center information from the purchase request. Again, removing some of that duplication of effort and coding that would be taking place. So for this fully matched invoice, all that's left to do is submit that. And what we might say is for fully matched invoices, they may then go straight through to finance for their final checks and processing. If it was, say, a mismatched invoice or one that needed further looking into, then you could actually route that for additional approval. So on that note, let's have a look at the approval of those expenses and also that invoice information. So again, to mention, this can be done on the web or the mobile application. And with the latter, I know an Aberdeen Group study found that on average, there's 3 times faster approvals when a mobile element is introduced. So you can review on the expense side the line item information. Any out of policy spend that resides there will be clearly flagged. And if the claimant has provided any comments, those can obviously be reviewed by that approver and they can determine whether that is a satisfactory reason or not. We can also allow comparison to any relevant budgetary information. But firstly, they'll be looking also at any invoice spend that's coming through and reviewing and checking that information. So on the budget side, if we think around this being allocated to specific event information, it may then impact that event budget. You can also set these up in a departmental fashion. It really depends on how you would have your budget set up. But it does provide that visibility into spend as it's coming through. So rather than having to check an additional spreadsheet, you would just click into that budgetary information, and using that traffic light view will present the health of that budget. So moving more through to after the event, and I guess more on the processor side, because we really want to get this information into relevant finance or ERP systems. So on the invoice side, they would be looking to obviously process any fully approved invoices. Because we are that central repository as well, it's key to mention that they can get a view of invoices no matter where they sit in the process. As we can see here, it will also flag if any of their invoices are duplicates. We often hear of suppliers sending through duplicates, trying to get them paid quicker. But from the perspective of approved invoices, they'll be looking just to process those, do some final checks. With the expense side, processors again can get a view of any fully approved invoices, and they can do their final checks. So again, much like with the approvals, they'll be able to see any out of policy spend clearly flagged. And this is the first stage in the process as well, where any VAT information would be presented. So that's not presented to approvers or claimants, that will leave their area of expertise. But for finance, they'll be able to check that the calculations of VAT being done by the system are indeed correct. And then even at this stage, you'll notice that the finance or processor has the ability to send this claim back either to the employee, the claimant, or the approver. So unless finance are happy, this claim wouldn't be progressing further in the process. Once expenses or invoices are fully approved, they will then be entered into batches ready for processing out of the Concur service. So there's a number of options available for that data transfer. So the first out of the box option that most of our clients would adopt is the on-demand option. So this will be where you extract a CSV file from Concur. It will populate all the information into that, so there's no rekeying that needs to be done. And then that can be mapped and entered then into the finance or ERP system uploaded. If you were looking at something more automated, then that's when you'd be looking at the other options. So SFTP is where we would host a file transfer server that on an overnight basis would control the pushing or pulling of information. So where we're talking around approved expenses or invoices, it's actually going to be then pushing that up into your finance or ERP system on an overnight basis. If you needed something more regular or frequent than that, then that's where we'd be looking at the other options, so web services or out-of-the-box connectors. So these can be run near real time. It does involve IT involvement, certainly on the web services side, around developing these web services where we are opening up our APIs. But on the connectors side, we do have a number of partners that have created connectors for certain systems, and also Concur developed connectors, internal connectors. So it's always worth checking to see whether we have any of those available for specific ERP or finance systems that are in use. But as I mentioned, with any of these, there's no manual rekeying that needs to occur. So for the finance team as well, you can see a reduction in the amount of time that's spent processing expenses or invoices. So great examples amongst our client base where they may have been spending up to a week on those tasks, but after implementing Concur, that can be reduced down to a day or less in that processing. Often an overlooked part of an automation project for expenses or invoices is actually around the reporting element and the additional visibility that can afford you as a business. So we do actually provide a number of pre-built reports that our clients can utilize. And also we provide a number of pre-built dashboards as well. So presenting that information that can be used and shared internally to make better informed decisions. And then we have the same on the expense side. So key reports around VAT or out of policy spend can be utilised and run from the service. So I just wanted to recap before we hand over for Q&A around some of the benefits that have been examined here around automating the expense and invoice processes. So on the efficiency side, we looked at how for business expenses, we can save time for not only claimants and approvers, but also for the finance team in the actual processing of that expense spend. And on the invoice side, it's really doing a lot of the data entry for your user base. So you don't have to do that data entry or that checking or that matching or scanning that goes on today. We've also looked around controlling spend. So with expenses, that may be around compliance to internal T&E. So those policy rules can be built into the service and be proactively flagged to users. So it acts very much as a visual guilt as they're compiling their expense claim and can dissuade them from spending that much, a second time round. And then also on the invoice side, when we're thinking around controlling spend, it's flagging those duplicate invoices as we saw, so ensuring that you're not spending and then having to try and recoup that information from suppliers or that money from suppliers. On the compliance side, we saw how obviously we can increase some compliance to internal policies, but also to external legislation or compliance. So the UK Bribery Act was mentioned there on the expense side. And then finally around visibility. So for both expense and invoice, it will reside on the single platform. So you can run reports across not only those as separate processes, but also you can run them across both services. So a good example of that might be hotel spend or taxi spend. You may have that coming through on expense claims, but likewise, you may have that coming through or supplier invoices if you have accounts set up with providers. So in order to get visibility across both areas of spend in a manual world can be difficult to say the least. That's very much a possibility and click of the button stuff with Concur. So I hope that has been a useful overview. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, but I would like to now open up for any questions that you may have on anything that we've covered. Okay, so I can see there are a number in here. So let me just have a look. So someone has asked, I like what you collect as expense invoice data. Can you export this in Excel format? Will each line have scan attached? So I'm wondering whether this is around the extraction of the expense invoice data where it's been fully approved and ready to go into the finance system, or whether this was more around the reporting side. So I'll answer it on both. So if it's around approved expenses, approved invoices, absolutely, as mentioned, they'll be entered into batches and that will be extracted into a CSV format, and that can then be uploaded into relevant systems. If it's asking more around whether you can extract that information around expenses and invoice for reporting purposes, there is that ability to do as well. So whilst we have the inbuilt reporting tool, it is also possible to extract that data into the likes of Excel, and then you can do your own interrogation from there. Look what else we've got. Any more around the demonstration? Don't see any more, so I think that might be it. I think the others were answered earlier. Perfect. Well, if there's no more questions, then I'll look to hand back over. Well, have a lovely afternoon, because I think I am the last in the agenda. So thank you very much for joining. I hope that's been useful. And if there are any other questions, then just reach out to us and we can take those offline.